Welcome, Motion Makers, to the Motion Makers podcast.
I am Nolan,
And I am,
and
in
this
fact,
is, in
Amber.
fact, Amber. Jinx.
Today, we're going to talk about expanding our circles, which is interesting because Nolan and I just had a conversation before recording this about whether or not we should even expand our circles.
We did.
But
I'm adamantly against it.
and I adamantly disagree with him, even though he makes valid points. So here we are.
It is the life.
It is the life. All right, Nolan, I have a question to start with for you.
All right, hit me with it.
What are your most meaningful connections in your life right now?
My wife, Kelsey, obviously. My two kiddos, Gabe and Leah. Those are definitely my most meaningful relationships right now. There are other meaningful relationships. So if anybody hears this, you have a meaningful relationship with me. That doesn't mean that I don't think I have a meaningful relationship with you, but where I spend the majority of my time and energy is with my family. Outside of that, I've got some relationships with people at church. One of them, kind of supersedes what my church life has been. My best friend, Waylon. We've got another really good friend, Dave, and another really good friend outside of that, Nathan. And then one really good friend that I made from several, Eli. And I've gotten really close, and Casey and Ashley. Now I feel like I just keep naming names. I don't want anybody to feel left out.
So tell me what makes
inside the church.
Tell me what makes a connection meaningful for you. Like, define a meaningful relationship for Nolan Reynolds.
Great question. It's really hard to nail down because I think I'm a fairly open person, and so it goes differently. Like there's not necessarily like one thing that I look for in people. Like I try not to build like really personal, intimate relationships with people that act outside of the bounds of what I would consider to be my personal value system. Now that doesn't mean that I don't build meaningful connections with people outside of that, but I try to keep like my most intimate relationships for people that share the values that I have. And I really think, we see that played out. I'm a pastor, so I always go back to the Bible, but I think we see that played out in the Bible too. With there's this thing that Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He said, "Bad company corrupts good character."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a principle that can superimpose itself upon all of your relationships. And one of the things that I believe in deeply is relational evangelism, right? Which means I'm trying to build relationships with people that are outside of the bounds of what I would normally walk in. But that also means that I can't have all of my most intimate time be with people that act antithetical to the things that I consider to be most valuable to me.
Oh, that's
so if
that, yeah.
Yeah, so if the thing that I value most, like my family has its core values, and at the top of those core values are faith and family. And if family is one of the most important things to me in the entire world, and I'm spending all of my most intimate time with somebody who is a known like serial cheater,
Mm-hmm.
right? That means I'm going to be spending all of my most intimate time with somebody that is completely contrary to the values that I say I hold deeply. Or faith being at the top of that. Let's say that not just somebody that is not open to faith, but somebody that is completely closed to faith. Think that it's absolutely ridiculous that anybody would even consider faith to be a valuable part of life. Now, I can have a meaningful connection with somebody like that. But if I'm spending all of my most intimate time with that person who is completely contrary to the thing that I say I hold to be most valuable, then it's going to drain me of my time and my energy. And so, all of that to say, I'm pretty open with people and open to building meaningful and lasting connections with people. But my most intimate, meaningful connections with people also have to be people that place faith in family as a high value in their lives.
That makes sense. And also, I think that that's really a good thing to note because we have said through our episodes, we've said that motion makers are people that have a hope for a better future, live out of a personal value system, and then act towards that hope by following their personal value system. And then the fourth thing is to not do it alone, which is what brings us to this episode, really, is because we know that in order to do those first three things, you can do them by yourself, but it's going to create that much more meaning when you do them with other people. And so that brings us to the tension of how to have healthy and good relationships,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
which we have
And I,
all figured out, right, Nolan?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen to me talk. I said superimpose.
That's right.
I obviously know what I'm talking about.
So intelligent.
Oh man,
We're
this
just
is
kidding.
one of those things that like through life experience you can speak on, but I was just telling you on the phone, and we won't divulge any of your personal and intimate details or any of my personal and intimate details, but I was just telling you on the phone that like I have like some insight into things like this, I think, but I've never found myself in a place where I've been able to do it very successfully.
Same.
Uh, and so building meaningful relationships, sustaining those meaningful relationships, um, there are things that we can have valuable insight and advice on. But honestly, as we go through our life, when you think about whenever you were in elementary school, like you had a different set of friends in elementary school than you were in middle school. And in middle school, then in high school, and in high school, then in college into the workforce, and then you have a family. And so your circle is changing all of the time. And the hope is that when we become full-fledged adults throughout the course of all these different relationships we've had in our life, we've learned the hope is that we've learned to carry ourselves with a level of character and integrity that will attract the type of human that we want to attract, and will be able to sustain from that point forward. But the reality is that sometimes that doesn't work.
That's true.
And sometimes relationships and friendships and all of that stuff, sometimes they fail.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can look back on those and you can point out some things that you could have done differently. And then you figure out what you should have done differently, and you do those things differently in the next set of relationships. And then those relationships fail too. Part of human nature is that it's really messy. And I can try to give you valuable advice and insight while at the same time recognizing I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, we're just which is what makes it a really valuable conversation too, I think, because we're all kind of in motion. We're all kind of figuring it out. And also, I think that it's a really big value to be open to new relationships while also being open to I don't know if causing is the right word, but like causing more vulnerability and intimacy in existing relationships as well. Which is not easy, which is why I think it bears the conversation, because how do we commit to being open to creating that kind of a friendship and relationships with people outside of our, I guess, inner circle?
Well, we don't, because vulnerability is a mistake. I'm just playing. I'm just playing.
It depends on who you're with, okay?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just kidding on that though. I've got a question though. What is it that you mean when you say widening our circle?
That's a great
What does
question.
that mean to you?
Um, so I guess the best way for me to answer that question is to tell a story, because a little over a year ago, I would say that my friendships were just vastly different than they are now. They
Mhm.
were, I had different friends, like specific people, and my friendships were made of something different. Like the connections that I had were um, more based in like the history that we held than in like the current value system that I hold. And
Mhm.
then because of a lot of different things. Like my friendships just started changing, which part of that was intention. Like I know over a year ago I was saying in therapy, like I need better friendships. Like just my friendships weren't great, and like what I was looking for in friendship is not what I was getting out of friendship. um and so when I talk about widening my circle, I'm kind of thinking of like how my friendships changed. And it started with recognizing like what wasn't working. And
Mm.
then and then I had to do that really vulnerable thing of like being open to meeting new people and kind of like looking for where can better friendships be. It was kind of just like not being stuck in the same cycles that I had been in for the last 10 years, you know? Like in setting that intention, that's when I was open to meeting you as a friend because
Mm.
the way that we met was kind of odd, I guess. Um
Very odd.
yeah, super odd. So Josie
Yeah.
had Izzy's that was down the street from you. And her and I were kind of looking around, and I was saying to her, because I'm not from Morganfield, like, what's the church situation around here? And she told me this story of this church right down the road that had a son and a father that held different churches in the same building. And I was like, that's weird. I want to know more. And then we had just finished
Like,
talking.
why don't they just have church together?
Yeah.
It's so strange.
Well, actually, it was more like, how do they, as father and son, have enough of a balance of a relationship to have different churches in the same building? That's awe-inspiring. My mom and I don't get along that well. We could never. But I knew nothing about you except what she said. And then I left the restaurant and I literally didn't even make it back to her house. And that three different people came in to get coffee and were like, "Hey Josie, you want to come down and listen to music when we rehearse?" And so she called me and she was like, "I don't know what just happened, but you have to come back." And I was like, "Okay." And she's like, "You just got done asking me about the rise." And then three people came in, three separate people, and told me to come down here today. She's like, "You have to come back. We have to go down there." And I was like, "Okay." So I dropped my
I
kids.
was not one of those people, by the way, for everybody
No, you
listening. I
weren't.
was not one of those people.
I don't even know who it was. Josie would know, but I came back to the restaurant. I dropped my kids off. I came back. And Josie was like, "Come on," which Josie's way more open than I would. I would never have walked into your church by myself like that, but she knew you. And so I was like, okay, I'll come ride on her coattails. And we came in, and I think you didn't even know what we were doing. Did you?
I had no clue. I thought y'all were in there to talk to me. You weren't in there to talk to me at all. So y'all walked in, and I was like, "Oh, come on into my office." And in y'all's heads, you were probably like, "We're actually here to listen to music," but you didn't say that. I just came in here and sat down and talked.
No, actually, I came in and I was like, "I want to see the closet upstairs. I've heard things.
Ah,
Show me." And so then you took us
forgot about that.
upstairs, and I just started
Yeah.
asking you all of the questions because I had a lot already at that point.
You have questions?
Yeah, I'm one of those
Huh.
people.
It's not what I know of you.
Huh, yeah. Um, but then after you showed us the closet, then you had us come into the office, which really, going into that situation, because it worked out as weirdly as it did, and I had already set the intention like I need better friendships, I went into coming into your church with like an openness that I probably wouldn't have had in another season. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
My questions were part of that. Like, I don't know. I guess I was okay with being like, "Hey, tell me all the things. I really want to know," you know?
Hmm.
Anyway, that's what I think of when I say widening our circles, which doesn't necessarily mean just meeting new people. Sometimes that means like going deeper in your current relationships, you know?
That's a valuable insight right there because I really don't think I'm with the notion, and we may part on this. I really don't think I'm with the notion that everybody needs to expand their inner circle. I actually think most people probably need to tighten their inner circle and get the right people in your inner circle. And so, whenever we think about or we talk about widening your inner circle, what I actually think of is less of a literal widening and more of a depth of your inner circle. I really think of finding the right people to put in your inner circle and then expanding outward after that. I think that's where the widening comes, is after that. Like, I've got some people on the inside of my circle. I named some of them earlier. Some others would be like Chase and Trish and Joseph. And like, there's a lot of people that I have these really deep, intimate relationships with.
Mhm.
But then when you get outside of that, I think you can only share that most personal, intimate space with so many people.
True.
Uh, and I think that to try to widen that circle would cause a level of exhaustion. At least it would for me. So I think that the biggest thing here would be less of widening your circle and making space for more circles, right? Like there's
That's a
a
good way to
a
put it.
level of relationship you go outside of, which we were talking about on the phone earlier, and it just struck me to say it that way. But we see that played out in the Gospels with Jesus as well. We know that Jesus had 12 disciples. We all talk about the 12 disciples and how amazing they were and how they built the foundation of the church for the future. And here we are, thousands of years later, and it's still sustaining itself. So we think about that 12, but inside of that 12, there was a three. There was Peter, James, and John, which was Jesus's most intimate circle. That's the three that he took with him to the Garden of Gethsemane whenever he wanted to pray. He took all 12 of them, but he took those three a little further and asked them to pray. And then he went out and prayed by himself. And it was also that three that he took with him whenever he was transfigured, up on
Yeah.
a mountain, and he stood next to Moses and Elijah in a scene that the human mind probably can't even comprehend.
Mhm.
Which is probably why the Gospels described it as a transfiguration, because it's something that was so unique. It was too difficult for human words to be able to put
Mhm.
into its depiction. He shared his most intimate moments with those three. He shared some intimate moments with the 12. And then outside of that 12, we find out in the middle of the Gospels that there was also this 70 disciples that he sent out to different cities to preach, repentance and to heal people and, all this stuff. And they all come back excited. And so we've got a three, we've got a 12, we've got a 70. And then you can look at the Gospels again and see that there were 5,000 people at one point,
Mhm.
5,000 men, no telling how many women and children were in that group, that were following him when Jesus multiplied the bread and the fish. And so at bare minimum, and I would say there are probably more circles inside of this too, but at
Yeah.
bare minimum, at some point in Jesus's ministry, we see like this circle of three, and then outside of this, you've got that circle of 12, and then outside of that, you've got 70, and then outside of that further, you've got 5,000. Now, did it go from 70 to 5,000? I doubt it. Like there was probably like another 200, or I don't know, who
Yeah.
knows the number. There was probably another large group of people that followed him around much longer than those 5,000 did. But we don't really see a circle expanding. We see more circles being added.
Right.
And I think that's a really valuable thing for us to understand, because in the way that you and I are wording it, people can walk away with this preconceived notion that we have to have this huge circle of people. And in reality, that's not what I mean.
Right.
And I think you should have a really like a level of depth with a group of people that you can really get into the trenches with, and then you can build circles on the outside of that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I agree actually. I thought going into this that we were going to have a difference of opinion here, but the more you talked about it, the more I agree with you, because I have that tight inner circle that would be like my husband and my kids, and we have Josh who's lived with us for God, forever. Um and I can't count that many years anymore. And then outside of that circle, we then have like our outer circle of, there's still really tight friendships, but coming back into that inner circle, like so if I talk outside of my just my marriage, because your marriage is always going to be, when you're married, your closest relationship, and so I don't want to like focus too much time on that. So if I'm looking at friendships, like all I can think about is Josh, because he is our best friend. He is my best friend. And like he is the person that I know outside of Jake that I would trust the most. And then outside of that, I have really great relationships with a lot of depth. But there's just a difference in I would go to Josh for a lot more things than I would necessarily go to like other people in that circle. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And so that's the way it's framed in my head whenever I hear it. That's the way that I see it. And how do I build more circles, not widen the circle that I have?
Well, and so then if we look at the circle that we have, I would say that the how in that is how do we create more trustworthy intimacy, vulnerability
Mhm.
in those relationships.
Think about it being like digging trenches, like people you're going to go to war with, right? The way you get a trench is you dig in, right? Those people that are in your most intimate circle, you've got to have a level of depth with them that you don't have with anybody else. And even that outside of husband and wife, I think even that will have its limits, right? You don't have to share everything with everybody, but you can have a level with each circle. You know, there's a level of depth that comes along with it. And I think about just digging into to the life stuff together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really common thing that I think that we say in church circles is like do life together. And
I
um
hate that phrase.
yeah, I do too. What's really funny is that like recently in my I guess reflection, I was like, what do we even mean when we say that? When we
No, I'm
say that,
saying
do
define
we
your
really
terms.
say? Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, I do life with people like Josh, but what does that even mean?
Yeah, do life together. That's one of those things that everybody says that nobody knows what it means. It's like, just let go and give it to God. It's like, okay, huh? What does that mean?
Yep.
Tell me how to do that.
Hmm.
Explain that to me.
Also, recognize it's going to be different in every situation. Like,
Yeah.
I guess it all comes back to trust, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So then
Absolutely.
if it comes back to trust, I think that the question that we're left with is then how do we be trustworthy relationship builders? Because then it comes back to our own personal responsibility. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
guess that comes back to our personal values, doesn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think you don't have to have relationships with people that have the exact same values that you do, but I think it's really hard to have your most intimate relationships be with people who have values that are contrary to yours. Right? Like you have a value system and I have a value system, and our value systems are not exactly the same, but they're not contrary to one another. And so
Right.
we've been able to build like a really meaningful relationship and connection, um, both of us based upon our own like subset of values. And those subset of values actually like work together and strengthen one another, even though they're not the same, because they're not working against each other.
Yeah. I think a really good example of that is one of your value systems, the intangibles, is discipline, resilience, and suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we talked in a previous episode about how that's kind of a circle for you. And since that episode, I've thought a lot about my own personal values. And one of my values is tending. And I see tending as that circle kind of because tending is when you where you have discipline. Tending is also where you see something and you need to make a change to it, which I think is resilience. Like it can be likened to resilience. And like
Mm-hmm.
tending is the value that I went back to when I was like, oh no, I need better friendships. That didn't mean I'm going to abandon the friendships I have. It meant I know that my friendships can be better than what they are right now. I don't know what that looks like, but I have a responsibility to myself and what I want out of this life to tend to that. And for some relationships, that meant, like we said, like going deeper, digging into the trench more. And for others, that meant like being open to a new friendship, like we have. Um, But when I talk about tending, I'm not necessarily talking about discipline, but because our values are so similar, I think that that's what works together for us. Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense? Sometimes I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think what you're saying is pretty similar to something that I've been trying to teach my son is that because I have my own set of like career personal values that I keep on my desk, right? Or I can always see them. They're right here.
Hmm.
That blurred. That was cool. Um, and then like we have a set of like family values, and I've been trying to teach my son that those values have things that already pre-exist them, right? Like one of our family values is um, ambition, but something that pre-exists ambition that like part of the premise of ambition is that you have to work hard, right? So each value in and of itself has all of these like branches that come off of it that feed it
Hmm.
and that make it possible to exist. And I think that that may be kind of what you're saying is that
Yeah.
tending already presupposes that you have to be disciplined
Hmm.
and that you have to be resilient, and that works the same for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, I think that this is the last question for this episode, but in your experience, so if you're expanding your circle by meeting new people, how do you stay open enough to find whether those people are going to be people that you go deeper with? What does that look like for you?
I think for me, it there's a couple of things at play there. Is that I don't always find it easy, meaningful, or beneficial to be completely open or vulnerable with everybody. But what I can do is be completely authentic with everybody. Like I can be who I really am without opening my soul and my burdens to every person that comes into my life. And so I try to be my full, weird, authentic self with everybody that I know and meet and allow people to either accept me or reject me based upon that authenticity. And
Yeah.
then vulnerability for me comes much later and sometimes never because I don't think that even in your most intimate relationships does everybody need to know everything about you.
Hmm.
Um, there will certainly be some relationships like with my wife where that is much more the case than with others. But I think you're just open and authentically you. And for me, that comes with a lot. Like sometimes I'm way too much for people, and sometimes I'm not. And those people that I'm not way too much for, great. Like we can have a great relationship.
Yeah. You just kind of let people show you who they are after you've shown them who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just takes time. Like
Yeah.
you just because the more you get to know somebody, the more you find out that they're not that they're so much more multifaceted than you originally
Hmm.
knew. And sometimes that's a really great thing.
Hmm.
But other times people let you down in that. Or not necessarily let you down, but they reveal a part of their character that can be unbecoming and you're like okay, cool, so they've made it to this circle and that's where they're going to stay,
That's a good way.
and so you've just got to gradually let people in rather than just opening everything all at once. I think that sets people up for a lot of hurt.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. And so you're also saying that we have to have good boundaries.
Yeah, basically I'm saying I'm jaded.
At least you're honest.
Yeah.
That's fair. Um, well, I think that the takeaway here is that it's important if you're a motion maker to be willing to expand your circle, whether that means expanding through depth or expanding through meeting new people. However, we recognize that that's not easy and it's going to come with holding its own tension in ways like being authentic but holding boundaries. Would you say that's a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would only add to that. I did a funeral earlier this week, and one of the things that I talked about is humans as a species have a really hard time holding the tension of duality,
Hmm.
right? That I can be authentic and yet not vulnerable is in our conversation what I think would speak to that. I think humans have a really hard time holding the tension that you can be authentic and not spill your guts about every little thing going on. But I also think that as we grow and mature and are trying to build meaningful relationships, not just relationships for relationship's sake, but meaningful relationships, I think boundaries are something that you have to hold to, because somebody may overstep a boundary that you didn't even realize you had, and that could break the relationship before it ever even got a chance to flourish. And so understanding who you are, what your value, I mean, back to values, I swear we're going to talk about that in every podcast.
Yeah, we are.
I haven't quoted my favorite proverb yet. Uh,
It's coming, guys. It's coming.
but I think those things are really important.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Nolan, thank you for doing this episode with me. I don't
Of
remember how we
course.
close. Do you remember how we close?
I have no idea. It's been
Man,
a little while.
do better than this. It's okay.
My brain is on about 3%.
I understand. Well, Motion Makers, thank you for coming to the Motion Makers podcast. This is just one of the things that we do at Cultivating Kentucky, and we hope you come back next week where we're going to expand on this, expanding your circle a little bit more to talk about how to expand your circle, not just why to expand your circle.
We're going to expand on the expansion.
That's right. Let's go.
Boom.